The gunshot echoed across the canyon just as Meredith Ashford raised her hand to the poacher's rifle. And in that moment, she knew she had made either the bravest or the most foolish decision of her 22 years. 3 days earlier, Meredith had arrived in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with nothing but a worn leather satchel and a determination that had carried her all the way from Philadelphia. The year was 1884, and the territory was still wild enough that a woman traveling alone drew stares and whispered concerns. She had not come west for adventure or fortune like so many others. She had come because her late father's final letter had mentioned the beauty of the land here. The way the sunset painted the mesas in colors he could not adequately describe. He had been a surveyor, spending his last years mapping the territories, and he had died with desert dust still in his lungs and wonder still in his words. Meredith had inherited his love of the natural world, his journals filled with sketches of plants and animals, his belief that the land deserved protection and respect. In Philadelphia, she had been considered peculiar for her interests, a woman more comfortable observing bird migrations than attending social gatherings. Here in New Mexico, she hoped to continue his work, to document the wildlife that made these canyons and mesas their home. The small room she rented above the general store was sparse but adequate. The proprietor, a weathered woman named Rosa, had looked at her with a mixture of pity and admiration when Meredith explained her purpose. "You are going to go out into the wilderness alone," Rosa had asked in heavily accented English. "To watch the animals, to study them," Meredith had corrected gently. "To understand them." Rosa had shaken her head but had not argued further. She had, however, insisted that Meredith take a rifle. "Even if you do not hunt, you must protect yourself. There are dangerous men out there, not just dangerous animals." Meredith had accepted the rifle reluctantly, hoping she would never need to use it. She was a decent shot, her father having taught her the basics, but the thought of actually firing at another living creature made her stomach turn. She had come to observe life, not take it. On her third morning in Albuquerque, Meredith woke before dawn and packed a small bag with her journal, pencils, a canteen, and some dried meat and bread. She had heard from the locals about a canyon to the north where bighorn sheep could sometimes be spotted on the ridges, and she was eager to see them for herself. The walk would take several hours, but the day was cool and clear, perfect for a long trek. The landscape unfolded before her in shades of red and gold, the earth ancient and patient beneath her feet. She passed clusters of juniper and pinyon pine, their scent sharp and clean in the morning air. A roadrunner darted across her path, and she paused to watch it disappear into the brush, delighted by the quick glimpse of the strange bird. Everything here felt so different from the ordered parks and gardens of Philadelphia. This was wildness itself, untamed and magnificent. By mid-morning, she reached the canyon. The walls rose steep and striated on either side, layers of geological time laid bare by wind and water. She found a sheltered spot beneath an overhang and settled in to wait and watch, her journal open on her lap. Patience was essential for this kind of work. Animals moved on their own schedules, and human eagerness meant nothing to them. An hour passed in peaceful silence. She sketched the canyon walls, noting the hardy plants that clung to seemingly impossible perches. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals with effortless grace. She was so absorbed in watching the bird that she almost missed the movement on the ridge above. Bighorn sheep, 3 of them, picking their way along a narrow ledge with the confidence of creatures born to vertical spaces. Meredith's heart leaped with excitement. She began sketching quickly, trying to capture the curve of their horns, the powerful build of their bodies. They were magnificent, Then she heard the voices. At first, she thought perhaps other people had come to admire the sheep, but the tone was wrong. There was nothing reverent or gentle in those rough voices. There was anticipation, the kind that made her skin prickle with unease. She looked up and saw them. 4 men, positioned on the opposite side of the canyon, their rifles already raised and trained on the sheep. Poachers. The sheep were protected by territorial law, their numbers having dwindled in recent years due to overhunting. These men clearly did not care about such regulations. Meredith did not think. She simply acted, driven by the same fierce protectiveness her father had instilled in her. She stood up and shouted across the canyon, "Stop! Those animals are protected. You cannot hunt them." The words echoed off the stone walls, and for a moment everything froze. The sheep, alerted to danger, began moving quickly along the ridge, seeking escape. The men lowered their rifles and turned to stare at her. Even from this distance, she could see the anger on their faces. One of them, a tall man with a dark beard, shouted back, "Mind your own business, woman. Get out of here." But Meredith did not move. The sheep were disappearing over the ridge, and relief flooded through her. She had saved them, at least for now. But her relief was short-lived as she realized the men were moving, not away but toward her, finding a path down and around the canyon. Her heart began to pound. She was alone out here, miles from town, and she had just made enemies of 4 armed men. Rosa's warning echoed in her mind. She reached for her rifle, checking that it was loaded, her hands shaking slightly. It took the men nearly 20 minutes to reach her side of the canyon, and with each passing minute, Meredith's fear grew. She considered running, but she knew she could not outpace them over unfamiliar terrain. She considered firing a warning shot, but that might only provoke them further. So she stood her ground, trying to project a confidence she did not feel. When they finally appeared, climbing up from the canyon floor, she raised her rifle. "Stay back," she said, pleased that her voice came out steady. "I do not want any trouble." The bearded man laughed, a harsh sound. "You do not want trouble. You just cost us a fortune in sheep horns, lady. Those things sell for good money to collectors back east." "They are protected by law," Meredith repeated. "What you are doing is illegal." "Law does not mean much out here," another man said. He was shorter, stocky, with a scar across his cheek. "And it certainly does not give some Eastern woman the right to interfere with our business." They were spreading out now. She realized with growing alarm, positioning themselves so she could not watch all of them at once. They were trying to surround her. "I will report you to the authorities in Albuquerque," she said. "They will come looking for you." "And tell them what?" the bearded man asked. "That you saw some men in the canyon. Do you know our names? Can you prove anything?" He took a step closer. "Besides, who says you will make it back to town to tell anyone anything?" The threat was clear, and terror shot through Meredith's body. She had been so focused on saving the sheep that she had not fully considered the danger she was placing herself in. These were hard men, men who made their living outside the law, and she was completely at their mercy. She raised the rifle higher, pointing it directly at the bearded man. "I said stay back." "You going to shoot me?" he asked, still advancing. "I do not think you have it in you." "I do not think you have ever shot at a person in your life." He was right, and they both knew it. Meredith's finger trembled on the trigger, but she could not bring herself to pull it. The man was close enough now that she could see the cruel amusement in his eyes. He reached out toward the barrel of her rifle. The sound of hoofbeats stopped him. Everyone turned to look as a rider appeared at the canyon's edge, his horse dark against the bright sky. He sat tall in the saddle, and even from a distance, Meredith could see the way he took in the scene with a quick, assessing glance. The poachers saw him too, and their postures changed, becoming wary. The rider urged his horse down into the canyon with practiced ease, closing the distance between them in moments. As he drew closer, Meredith could see he was perhaps 25 or 26, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that fell nearly to his shoulders beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He wore typical cowboy clothing, dusty from travel, and there was a rifle in a scabbard on his saddle and a revolver at his hip. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, sharp and intelligent, missing nothing. He pulled his horse to a stop between Meredith and the poachers, positioning himself as a barrier. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried an edge of authority that demanded attention. "Seems like you fellows are having a disagreement." The bearded man's expression darkened. "This is not your concern, friend. Just a misunderstanding between us and the lady." "Does not look like a misunderstanding from where I am sitting," the cowboy said. His gaze flicked to Meredith, taking in her raised rifle and frightened expression, then back to the men. "Looks like 4 armed men threatening a woman. That makes it my concern." "She interfered with our hunt," the scarred man said. "Cost us money." "Your hunt?" The cowboy's voice took on a harder quality. "Those sheep up on the ridge, the ones that are protected by territorial law." He shook his head slowly. "So you are poachers. That makes this even simpler." The bearded man's hand moved toward his gun, and Meredith's breath caught. But the cowboy was faster. His revolver was out and cocked before any of the poachers could draw, the movement so smooth it seemed almost lazy. But there was nothing lazy about the way he held the weapon or the look in his eyes. "I would not," he said quietly. "I am not in the mood to shoot anyone today, but I will if I have to, and I will not miss." The tension stretched out for several heartbeats. Meredith found she was holding her breath, her own rifle still raised but momentarily forgotten. She could see the calculation in the poacher's eyes, weighing their chances, considering whether 4 against 1 was enough of an advantage. The cowboy seemed to read their thoughts. "Before you get any ideas, you should know that I am not just some passing rider. Name is Xavier Nolan. I scout for the territorial marshal, and right now I am on my way back to Albuquerque to report on illegal hunting activity in this area. I already have descriptions of several poachers. Would be real easy to add 4 more to that list." His smile was not friendly. "Or I could bring you in right now, save the marshal a trip out here." The lie, if it was a lie, was delivered with such conviction that even Meredith half believed it. The poachers clearly believed it entirely. She saw doubt and fear replace the anger in their faces. "We were not doing anything wrong," the bearded man tried, but his voice lacked conviction. "Then you will not mind coming back to town with me to explain that to the marshal," Xavier said pleasantly. "I am sure he will be very interested in hearing your story, and in checking whether any of you have outstanding warrants. Seems like the kind of thing that might turn up." That was the final straw. The bearded man took a step back, raising his hand slightly. "No need for all that. We were just leaving. No harm done." "No harm intended, you mean," Xavier corrected. "I think you owe the lady an apology first." The man looked like he wanted to argue, but he swallowed his pride. "Sorry for the misunderstanding, miss," he muttered. Xavier gestured with his revolver. "Now get out of here. And if I hear about any more poaching in this area, I will make it my personal mission to track you down." "Are we clear?" They were. The 4 men retreated quickly, scrambling back down into the canyon and away. Xavier kept his gun out until they were well out of sight, listening carefully to the sound of their departure. Only when he was satisfied they were truly gone did he holster the revolver and turn to Meredith. "You can lower your rifle now, miss. They are gone." Meredith realized she was still aiming at the spot where the poachers had been standing. Her arms were trembling with the strain of holding the weapon up for so long. She lowered it carefully, suddenly feeling weak in the knees. The fear she had been suppressing came flooding back, and she found herself shaking. Xavier dismounted quickly and moved to her side. "Easy now. You are safe. They are not coming back." "I thought they were going to kill me," Meredith said, her voice coming out thin and strained. "I thought I was going to die out here because I could not keep my mouth shut about some sheep." "Those sheep are worth keeping your mouth open about," Xavier said firmly. He took the rifle from her gently, setting it aside, then guided her to sit down on a nearby rock. "Take some deep breaths. The fear will pass." She did as he instructed, focusing on breathing slowly and deeply. Xavier crouched nearby, giving her space but staying close enough to help if needed. He pulled a canteen from his saddle and offered it to her. "Drink some water. It will help." The water was warm but welcome. Meredith drank deeply, feeling her racing heart begin to slow. She studied her rescuer more carefully now. Up close, she could see the lines at the corners of his eyes, evidence of long days in the sun, and a thin scar along his jaw. His face was strong-featured and weathered, but there was kindness in his expression, genuine concern for her well-being. "Thank you," she said finally. "If you had not come when you did, I do not know what would have happened." "Good thing I was riding through then," Xavier said. He settled back on his heels, studying her with curiosity. "What is an Eastern lady doing out here alone, confronting poachers? That is either very brave or very foolish. I have not decided which yet." Despite everything, Meredith found herself almost smiling. "Probably very foolish." "I am Meredith Ashford. I came to Albuquerque to study the wildlife here, to document the animals and plants. When I saw those men about to shoot the sheep, I just reacted. I did not think about the consequences." "Meredith Ashford," Xavier repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "Well, Miss Ashford, you have got more courage than sense, but your heart was in the right place. Those bighorns do need protecting. Their numbers have been dropping for years because of men like those poachers." He stood up, offering her a hand. "I am Xavier Nolan. Actually, I'm a scout sometimes, though I was exaggerating my current employment status to scare those fellows off. Mostly I work ranches, drive cattle, whatever needs doing." She took his hand and let him help her to her feet. His grip was strong and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. "You lied very convincingly." "Sometimes a convincing lie is better than an unconvincing truth," Xavier said with a slight smile. "Out here, reputation and confidence can be worth more than bullets. Though I am glad we did not have to test that theory too far." Meredith looked around at the canyon, at her scattered belongings. Her journal had fallen when she stood to confront the poachers, and her pencils were strewn across the rocks. The peaceful morning of observation and sketching she had planned seemed like a distant memory now. "I should get back to town," she said quietly. "I do not think I am going to get any more work done today." "I will ride with you," Xavier said immediately. "Those men might be gone, but I would feel better knowing you got back safely. And besides, it is on my way." She wanted to argue, to insist she could manage on her own, but the truth was she would feel much safer with company. "I would appreciate that. Thank you." They gathered her belongings together, and Xavier helped her pack everything back into her satchel. His horse, a dark bay gelding with intelligent eyes, stood patiently waiting. Xavier swung up into the saddle and then extended his hand to Meredith. "Come on up. It is a long walk back to Albuquerque." Meredith hesitated only a moment before taking his hand and letting him pull her up behind him. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep her balance, and she was acutely aware of the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. It felt strange and intimate to be so close to a man she had just met, but there was also something reassuring about it, something that made her feel protected. Xavier guided the horse back up out of the canyon and onto the trail that led toward Albuquerque. The journey would take several hours, and for a while they rode in companionable silence, the only sounds the steady clip of hooves on hard, packed earth and the whisper of wind through the scrub. Finally, Xavier spoke. "So you came all the way from the east to study animals. That is not something you hear every day. How did you end up with such an unusual interest?" "My father," Meredith said. "He was a surveyor, and he traveled all over the territories. He would send letters home describing the places he had been, the creatures he had seen. He made it all sound so wonderful, so alive. When he retired, he spent his time creating these beautiful journals, documenting everything he could remember. After he died last year, I inherited them, and I realized I wanted to continue his work. I wanted to see these places for myself and add to what he had started." "He would be proud of you," Xavier said. "Coming out here alone, following your passion, that takes real courage. Or real foolishness," Meredith echoed his earlier words. "I am beginning to think I was not fully prepared for how different things are out here. In Philadelphia, the biggest danger was crossing a busy street." Xavier chuckled. "The West has its challenges, that is certain, but it also has its rewards. There is a freedom here, a sense of possibility. You can be whoever you want to be, do whatever you are capable of doing. Your background and family name matter less than your actions." "Is that why you are here?" Meredith asked. "For the freedom, among other reasons." Xavier was quiet for a moment, and Meredith wondered if she had asked something too personal. But then he continued. "My family had a small farm in Missouri. My father died when I was 15, and my mother remarried a year later. My stepfather and I did not see eye to eye on much of anything. When I turned 18, I headed west to make my own way. That was 8 years ago. I have worked ranches all over New Mexico and Arizona, learned to track, to read the land, to survive in places that do not forgive mistakes. It has been a good life. Do you ever miss Missouri, your family?" "My mother sometimes," Xavier admitted. "But she made her choice and I made mine. I write to her when I can, let her know I am alive and well. That is enough." They crested a rise, and Albuquerque appeared in the distance, a collection of adobe buildings spread out in a valley, smoke rising from chimneys. The sight should have been reassuring, but Meredith felt a strange disappointment. The ride would be over soon, and she would have to say goodbye to Xavier. The thought bothered her more than it should. She had known him for only a few hours, but he had saved her life and shown her nothing but kindness and respect. In her limited experience, those qualities were not as common as they should be. As they rode into town, people looked up and stared. Meredith realized what they must look like, her riding behind him with her arms around his waist, dust-covered and disheveled. The gossips would have plenty to talk about, but she found she did not care as much as she probably should. Xavier guided his horse to the general store where Meredith was staying. He dismounted first and then helped her down, his hands firm and steady on her waist. For a moment they stood close together, and Meredith found herself looking up into his dark eyes, seeing concern and something else there, something that made her heart beat faster for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "Thank you again," she said softly, "for everything. I owe you my life." "You do not owe me anything," Xavier said. "I am just glad I was there when you needed help." He hesitated, as if wrestling with something, then continued. "Miss Ashford, I know we just met, and this might be forward of me, but I would like to see you again. I would like to know that you are settling in all right, that you are safe." Meredith felt warmth spread through her chest. "I would like that too, very much." Xavier's smile transformed his face, making him look younger, less guarded. "Good. I will be in town for a few days at least. Maybe I could show you some safer places to observe wildlife. places where you are less likely to run into poachers." "That sounds wonderful," Meredith said, meaning it. They made arrangements to meet the following afternoon, and then Xavier tipped his hat to her and rode off down the street. Meredith watched him go, feeling strange and light and confused all at once. She had come to New Mexico to study animals and continue her father's work, not to develop feelings for a cowboy she had just met. But there was no denying the connection she felt, the way her pulse quickened when he smiled at her. Rosa was waiting inside the store, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "Meredith, I saw you ride in with that cowboy. What happened? Are you hurt?" Meredith assured her she was fine and told her the story, leaving out only the most frightening details. Rosa listened with wide eyes, making the sign of the cross when Meredith described the confrontation with the poachers. "You are lucky that Xavier Nolan came along," Rosa said. "He is known as a good man, honest and fair. Many of the ranchers trust him. You could have had much worse help. He is going to show me some places where I can observe animals safely," Meredith said, unable to keep the smile off her face. Rosa's expression turned knowing. "Ah, I see. Well, you could do worse than Xavier Nolan. But be careful, child. The heart is a wild thing, and it does not always lead us down safe paths." That night, lying in her small room, Meredith found she could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Xavier's face, remembered the feeling of riding behind him, the solid strength of him. She told herself she was being ridiculous, that she barely knew him, that she was here for her work, not for romance. But her heart was not listening to her practical arguments. The next afternoon, Xavier arrived exactly when he said he would, riding the same bay horse and wearing a clean shirt. Meredith had dressed carefully, choosing her most practical divided skirt and sturdy boots, but she had also taken extra care with her hair, pinning it up neatly. Xavier's eyes lit up when he saw her, and she knew the extra effort had been worthwhile. "Ready for a safer adventure?" he asked, offering her a hand up. "As ready as I will ever be," Meredith said, settling behind him with increasing familiarity. Xavier guided them east out of town, toward a series of low mesas. He talked as they rode, pointing out landmarks, explaining the terrain. His knowledge of the land was extensive and clearly hard-earned. He showed her a small spring where deer came to drink at dawn and dusk, a grove of cottonwoods where birds nested in abundance, a rocky outcropping where lizards sunned themselves in the afternoon heat. At each location, Meredith pulled out her journal and sketched, making notes about what she saw. Xavier watched with interest, asking questions about her process, about what she hoped to accomplish with her documentation. "Most people think studying animals is pointless," Meredith admitted. "They see them as resources to be used or pests to be eliminated. But I believe understanding them, really understanding how they live and what they need, is important. If we do not know what we have, how can we protect it?" "That is a wise way of looking at things," Xavier said. "I have spent enough time out here to know that everything is connected. You start removing pieces, and the whole thing can fall apart. Ranchers who kill all the predators end up with too many rabbits and prairie dogs eating their grass. Hunters who take too many animals find there is nothing left to hunt. Your father understood that, it seems." "He did," Meredith said warmly. "I wish you could have met him. I think the two of you would have gotten along well." They spent the whole afternoon together. And as the sun began to lower toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Xavier suggested they head back to town. But instead of taking the direct route, he led them to the top of a small mesa where the view stretched for miles in every direction. "I come up here sometimes when I need to think," Xavier said as they sat together on a flat rock, watching the sunset. Something about seeing the world spread out like this, it puts things in perspective. Makes your problems seem smaller, your possibilities seem bigger. It is beautiful, Meredith breathed, and it was. The land was harsh and unforgiving in many ways, but it had a wild beauty that stirred something deep inside her. I understand why my father loved it here, why he kept coming back. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the colors change and deepen. Meredith was acutely aware of Xavier beside her, the small space between them feeling charged with possibility. She wanted to lean against him, to close that distance, but she was not sure if that was appropriate, if he felt the same pull she did. Xavier turned to look at her, his expression serious in the fading light. "Miss Ashford, Meredith, I need to be honest with you about something." Her heart jumped. "What is it?" "I was not just passing through that canyon yesterday by chance. I had been following those poachers for 2 days, trying to figure out what they were up to, whether they were part of a larger group. When I heard shouting, I came to investigate, and I found you standing up to 4 armed men over some sheep." "So you really were tracking them," Meredith said. "You really do work with the law sometimes." "Sometimes," Xavier confirmed, "when the marshal needs someone who knows the backcountry, but that is not what I am trying to say." He took a breath. "What I am trying to say is that in the moment I saw you standing there, so brave and so foolish and so determined to do the right thing, something shifted inside me. I have met a lot of people in my years out here, but I have never met anyone quite like you." Meredith's breath caught. "Xavier." "I know it has only been a day," he continued. "I know this is too fast, too soon, but I would like to spend more time with you, get to know you properly, if you are willing." "I am willing," Meredith said immediately. "More than willing. I have been thinking about you constantly since yesterday. I thought maybe I was being foolish, that I was imagining this connection between us." "You are not imagining it," Xavier said softly. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her skin. "I feel it too." They sat there as the stars began to emerge, hands clasped, talking about everything and nothing. Xavier told her about his travels, the places he had been, the things he had seen. Meredith told him about Philadelphia, about her unconventional education, about the father who had encouraged her curiosity when society said women should focus on more appropriate pursuits. "He sounds like he was a remarkable man," Xavier said. "To raise a daughter who is not afraid to stand up for what she believes in, even when it puts her in danger." "He would have liked you," Meredith said with certainty. "He always said the measure of a man was not in his words but in his actions. You proved your measure yesterday." They rode back to town under the stars, and when Xavier helped Meredith down from his horse outside the general store, he held onto her hands for a long moment. "Tomorrow?" he asked. "Tomorrow," she agreed. Over the following weeks, tomorrow became their promise, repeated every evening when they parted. Xavier showed Meredith hidden corners of the territory, places where wildlife thrived away from human interference. He taught her to read tracks, to identify the signs of different animals, to move quietly through the landscape. In return, she showed him how to really see, to notice the small details, to appreciate the intricate beauty of the natural world. They spent long days together, sometimes talking constantly, sometimes riding in companionable silence. Meredith filled journal after journal with sketches and observations, her work growing more detailed and confident. Xavier began carrying his own small notebook, jotting down things he noticed, questions he had. They challenged each other, learned from each other, and with each passing day the bond between them deepened. The people of Albuquerque noticed, of course. It was impossible to miss the way Xavier and Meredith looked at each other, the way they gravitated toward one another. Rosa watched with approval, declaring that Xavier was a good match for her unusual boarder. Others were less certain, questioning whether an educated Eastern lady and a working cowboy could truly make a life together. Xavier addressed her concerns one evening about 6 weeks after they had met. They were sitting by a small fire in the desert, having spent the day observing a pair of golden eagles nesting in a cliff face. The sun had set, and the night was cool and clear, the Milky Way a river of light overhead. "You ever think about going back east?" Xavier asked suddenly. Meredith looked up from her journal, surprised. "Why would I go back east? You have family there, I assume. Friends. A life you left behind. I know you came here for your work, but that does not mean you have to stay forever." "I have an aunt and some cousins in Philadelphia," Meredith said slowly. "But we were never close. My friends were few, and most of them thought I was eccentric anyway. As for a life, I did not really have one there, not the kind that mattered. I was just existing, going through motions, waiting for something to happen." She set her journal aside and moved closer to him. "Out here, I feel alive. I feel like I am doing something that matters." "Why are you asking?" Xavier stared into the fire. "Because I need to know what you want, Meredith. I need to know if this us is something temporary for you, an adventure before you return to the life you are supposed to have." "Is that what you think?" Meredith asked, hurt coloring her voice. "That this is just an adventure for me?" "I do not know what to think," Xavier admitted. "You are educated, cultured, from a good family. I am a cowboy who can barely write his own name. We come from different worlds." "You can write perfectly well," Meredith said. "I have seen your notes, and I do not care about different worlds. I care about you, Xavier. I care about the man who saved my life, who has shown me such patience and kindness, who looks at me like I am actually worth seeing." She took his hand firmly. "I am not going back east. This is my home now. You are my home now." Xavier turned to her then, his eyes intense in the firelight. "You mean that?" "Every word." He cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as she responded. Meredith had been kissed before, chaste pecks from suitors her aunt had approved of, but nothing like this. This was heat and promise and belonging all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Meredith Ashford. I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I love you. I think I have loved you since I saw you standing up to those poachers, foolish and brave and utterly determined." "I love you too," Meredith whispered. "I have never felt this way about anyone. I did not know I could feel this way." They stayed by the fire late into the night, wrapped in each other's arms, talking about the future. Xavier told her about a piece of land he had been saving for, a small valley with water and good grass, a place where he could build something permanent. Meredith talked about her dream of publishing her father's journals along with her own work, creating a comprehensive natural history of the territory. "We could do it together," Xavier said. "Build a place that is ours, where you could work on your documentation and I could raise horses. We could make it work." "Yes," Meredith said simply. "We could. We will." 3 months after they met, Xavier took Meredith to see the land he had purchased. It was everything he had described, a small valley sheltered by red rock walls, a spring-fed stream running through the center, grass and scattered trees providing shade. Meredith fell in love with it immediately. "This is perfect," she breathed. "Xavier, this is absolutely perfect." "I was hoping you would think so," Xavier said. He pulled her close, his arms around her waist. "Because I want to build a house here, Meredith, a home, and I want you to share it with me. I am asking you to marry me." Meredith turned in his arms to face him, her eyes shining. "Yes. Yes. Of course, yes." The wedding took place in Albuquerque 6 weeks later, a simple ceremony attended by the friends they had made in town. Rosa cried happy tears and declared she had known from the beginning that they were meant for each other. The local priest, though initially dubious about the match, was won over by the obvious love and respect between the couple. They spent their wedding night in the small room above the general store, and if Meredith had been nervous about the physical intimacy, Xavier's gentleness and patience put her at ease. They learned each other slowly, carefully, with tenderness and growing passion. It was nothing like the clinical descriptions Meredith had heard from married women, whispered warnings about duty and endurance. This was joy and pleasure and connection, their bodies learning to speak the same language their hearts already knew. In the morning, they loaded a wagon with supplies and headed to their land to begin building their future. Xavier had friends among the local ranchers, men who owed him favors or simply respected him enough to offer help. Within a few weeks, with many hands working together, a modest house took shape. It was simple but sturdy, 2 rooms with a fireplace and windows that looked out over the valley. Meredith threw herself into making it a home, sewing curtains, arranging the furniture Xavier built, creating a workspace where she could continue her documentation. Xavier began working with the wild horses that roamed the area, patient and skilled, building a small herd that he could train and sell. Their days fell into a comfortable rhythm. They woke before dawn, working while the day was cool. Xavier tended the horses and made improvements to their property, building a barn, fencing pastures, digging an irrigation system to water a small garden. Meredith continued her wildlife studies, venturing out to observe and sketch, always telling Xavier where she was going and when she would return. She also began the painstaking process of organizing and editing her father's journals, preparing them for publication. In the evenings, they would sit together and share what they had learned or accomplished that day. Xavier taught Meredith to ride better, to rope, to handle the horses with confidence. She taught him about the animals they shared the land with, pointing out the tracks of a mountain lion, explaining the behavior of the hawks that nested in the cliffs, identifying the calls of different birds. Their first year together was not without challenges. Money was tight, and there were times when they ate simple meals and worried about whether they could afford the supplies they needed. A drought in the summer made water scarce and forced them to work harder to keep their garden and animals alive. Xavier took short-term jobs with nearby ranches to bring in extra income, and Meredith sold some of her sketches to Eastern publications. But through all of it, they had each other. The love between them did not fade or diminish, but grew deeper and more resilient. They learned to work as a team, to support each other through difficulties, to celebrate small victories together. Late in their first year of marriage, Meredith realized she was pregnant. The realization came slowly. A missed monthly course, a persistent queasiness in the mornings, a tenderness in her breasts. When she finally allowed herself to acknowledge what was happening, joy and fear warred within her. She wanted a child, wanted to start a family with Xavier, but she also knew the dangers of childbirth, especially out here far from doctors and hospitals. She told Xavier that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. He was silent for a long moment after she spoke, and she worried he was not pleased, but when he turned to her, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I am going to be a father." "Are you happy?" Meredith asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Xavier said. "Terrified, amazed, grateful, all of those things, but mostly just so full of love I think I might burst with it." They spent the evening making plans, talking about all the things they would need to do to prepare. Xavier was determined that Meredith would have the best care possible. He made arrangements for a midwife from town to stay with them as her time drew near, and he built a cradle from smooth wood, sanding it until there was not a single rough edge. Meredith continued her work through the pregnancy, though she stayed closer to home as she grew larger. She used the time to work on her father's journals, writing introductions and adding her own observations to complement his. It was satisfying work, a way of honoring his memory while building something new. In late spring, as the desert bloomed with wildflowers, Meredith went into labor. It was long and difficult, hours of pain that seemed endless. Xavier stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement. The midwife was capable and calm, guiding Meredith through the process with firm instructions. Finally, as dawn broke over the valley, their son was born. He came into the world screaming, healthy and strong, with dark hair like his father and eyes that would eventually settle into the same clear gray as his mother's. Xavier held him with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face, and Meredith knew she had never seen anything more beautiful than her husband holding their child. They named him Thomas, after Meredith's father, with the middle name of James for Xavier's father. Little Thomas was a good baby, curious and alert, seeming to take in the world with wide-eyed wonder from his first moments. As he grew, it became clear he had inherited both his parents' love of the natural world. He was happiest outside, watching birds, touching plants, observing the horses with intense focus. Life settled into a new rhythm with the baby. Meredith's work slowed but did not stop. She learned to sketch with Thomas strapped to her back, to write her notes while he napped in the shade. Xavier was a devoted father, spending hours with his son, talking to him constantly even though the baby could not understand the words, showing him the horses, taking him on gentle rides around their property. When Thomas was just over a year old, Meredith received word that a publisher in Boston was interested in her father's journals. They wanted to publish them as a series, with her notes and illustrations included. It was a dream realized, validation of all the work she had done. The money from the publication would make their lives significantly easier, allowing them to expand their horse operation and secure their future. Xavier was so proud he could barely contain it. He rode to every neighboring ranch to share the news, bragging about his clever wife to anyone who would listen. Meredith was embarrassed by the attention, but also deeply touched by his obvious pride in her accomplishments. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah, arrived 2 years after Thomas. She was smaller than her brother had been, but just as healthy, with Xavier's dark coloring and a serious expression that made her look wise beyond her infant years. Thomas was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to hold her constantly, bringing her flowers and interesting rocks he found in his explorations. As their children grew, Meredith and Xavier made sure to pass on their love of the land. They taught Thomas and Sarah to respect the animals, to observe without disturbing, to take only what was needed. The children grew up bilingual in a sense, fluent in both the language of ranching and the language of natural science, equally comfortable discussing horse bloodlines and bird migration patterns. The years passed in a blur of growth and change. Their horse operation became well known throughout the territory, Xavier's skill at training and his reputation for honesty making him a sought-after partner. Meredith published 3 more volumes of natural history, her work gaining recognition in scientific circles back east. She received correspondence from professors and naturalists, her observations cited in academic papers. But despite the success and recognition, they never forgot what mattered most. Every evening, no matter how busy the day had been. They made time to sit together as a family, watching the sunset over their valley, sharing stories of the day. Xavier would play his harmonica, a skill he had never mentioned until one evening years into their marriage when he had pulled it from a drawer and filled their home with music. Thomas learned to play as well, and later Sarah, so that their evenings were often filled with the sound of simple melodies and laughter. When Thomas was 10 and Sarah was 8, Meredith found herself pregnant again. It was unexpected, and she was older now, nearly 35, which made the pregnancy riskier. But she and Xavier faced it together, as they had faced every challenge in their marriage. This time, twin boys arrived, identical and perfect, with lungs that announced their presence to the entire valley. They named them Daniel and David, and suddenly their home was full to bursting with noise and energy. The older children stepped up to help, Thomas serious and responsible in his care of his younger brothers, Sarah patient and gentle. Xavier joked that they had created their own ranch crew, a full workforce in the making. But beneath the jokes was real gratitude and wonder at the life they had built together. Years continued to unfold, marked by the rhythms of the seasons and the milestones of their children's growth. Thomas showed an aptitude for working with horses that rivaled his father's, and by the time he was 16, he was training colts on his own. Sarah inherited her mother's eye for detail and love of documentation, filling her own journals with observations and sketches. The twins were still young but showed signs of being adventurous and bold, keeping their parents constantly on their toes. Through it all, the love between Meredith and Xavier remained the foundation on which everything else was built. They still made time to ride out together, just the two of them, returning to the places where they had first fallen in love. They still talked late into the night, sharing thoughts and dreams and fears. They still reached for each other first thing in the morning and last thing at night, the physical connection between them as strong as ever. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Meredith back to the canyon where they had met. It was the first time she had been there since that fateful day, and she was surprised by the rush of emotion she felt as they approached. They left their horses at the bottom and climbed to the spot where she had confronted the poachers all those years ago. "You remember how terrified I was?" Meredith asked, standing at the same spot, looking out over the canyon. "I remember how brave you were," Xavier corrected. "Standing up to 4 armed men because you believed it was the right thing to do. That was the moment I started falling in love with you, even though I did not know it yet." "I thought I was going to die," Meredith admitted. "And then you appeared like something out of a story. My hero on horseback." Xavier laughed. "I do not know about hero. I was just a cowboy who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "No," Meredith said firmly, turning to face him. "You were exactly who you needed to be. You are exactly who you need to be. You saved my life that day, Xavier, but more than that, you gave me a life worth saving. You gave me love and family and belonging. You gave me everything." Xavier pulled her close, kissing her softly. "You gave me everything too. A home, a purpose, children, love. Before you, I was just drifting, taking jobs, moving from place to place. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something lasting." They stood together in the canyon where their story had begun, holding each other close, the years stretching behind them full of memories and ahead of them full of promises yet to be fulfilled. The bighorn sheep had returned to the canyon, their numbers growing now that the poaching had been curtailed. Meredith could see them on the ridge above, moving with their characteristic confidence, and she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had made a difference that day and in all the days since. As the sun began to lower, painting the canyon walls in shades of gold and crimson, Xavier took Meredith's hand. "Ready to go home, always," Meredith said, meaning it in every sense. Home was not just the house they had built or the land they worked. Home was wherever they were together, this man who had appeared when she needed him most and had stayed by her side through every joy and challenge since. They rode back to their valley as the stars emerged, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss and countless nights since. Their children would be waiting, the house bright with lamplight and warm with the smell of dinner cooking. There would be stories to tell and chores to discuss and plans to make for the days ahead. There would be laughter and probably some minor crisis that needed solving, because that was life with 4 children on a working ranch. But there would also be love, constant and unwavering, the kind of love that had been forged in a moment of danger and had grown stronger with each passing year. The kind of love that could weather any storm, overcome any obstacle, because it was built on respect and partnership and genuine affection. As they approached their home, Thomas came out to take their horses, grinning at his parents. "Good ride." "The best," Xavier said, helping Meredith down from the saddle. His hands lingered on her waist, and they shared a look that communicated everything words could not. Inside, the house was organized chaos. Sarah was setting the table while trying to keep the twins from stealing food before dinner. The air smelled of roasted meat and fresh bread. It was warm and loud and perfect. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Meredith and Xavier sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The valley spread out before them, dark and peaceful under the stars. Xavier's arm was around Meredith's shoulders, her head resting against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I had not ridden through that canyon that day?" Xavier asked quietly. "No," Meredith said, "because I think somehow, some way we would have found each other anyway. Some things are just meant to be." Xavier kissed the top of her head. "I like to think you are right. I like to think that the universe wanted us together badly enough that it would have found a way." They sat in comfortable silence, 2 people who had started as strangers and had become everything to each other. The cowboy who had been drifting and the Eastern lady who had been searching, both finding exactly what they needed in the most unexpected way. Their story was not one of grand adventures or dramatic events. It was simpler and deeper than that. It was a story of 2 people who chose each other and kept choosing each other, day after day, year after year. Who built a life together based on mutual respect, shared values, and a love that grew deeper with time rather than fading. In the years that followed, their family continued to grow and change. Thomas married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, a strong, capable woman who fit seamlessly into their family. They built a house on the far side of the valley and started their own horse operation, working closely with Xavier. Sarah pursued her love of natural science, corresponding with universities back east, eventually publishing her own work on the flora of New Mexico. The twins grew into confident young men, each finding their own path, one as a farrier and the other as a guide for Eastern tourists wanting to experience the West. Grandchildren arrived, filling the valley with new life and laughter. Xavier and Meredith watched their family expand with joy and gratitude, seeing their values and love passed down to the next generation. They remained active and involved, though they gradually stepped back from the daily operation of the ranch, trusting their children to carry on what they had built. On their 30th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Xavier stood up at dinner and raised his glass. 30 years ago, I met a woman in a canyon who was brave enough to stand up to 4 armed men to protect some sheep. I thought she was either the bravest or the most foolish person I had ever met. Turns out she was both, and I loved her for it." He looked at Meredith, his eyes still full of the same love and admiration they had held 3 decades earlier. "You have given me the best 30 years of my life, Meredith. Here is to 30 more." "To 30 more," everyone echoed, glasses raised. Meredith stood and moved to Xavier's side, taking his hand. "When I came to New Mexico, I was looking for a way to honor my father's memory and continue his work. I found that, but I found so much more. I found a partner, a love, a home, a family. I found everything I did not even know I was searching for." She looked around the table at the faces of her children and grandchildren. "This is my legacy. Not the books or the documentation, though I am proud of those. This family, this love, this life we built together. That is what matters." As the celebration continued around them, Xavier pulled Meredith close and whispered in her ear, "Still glad I rode through that canyon." "Every single day," Meredith whispered back. "Every single day." And that was the truth of it. The simple, beautiful truth of a love that had started with a moment of danger and had blossomed into a lifetime of partnership and joy. The cowboy and the Eastern lady, the rescuer and the rescued, though in truth they had rescued each other. From loneliness, from purposelessness, from lives that had been incomplete without the other. Their story became legend in the area, told and retold by those who knew them. The woman who had stood up to poachers and the cowboy who had saved her, who had fallen in love and built an empire of sorts together. But to those who knew them best, the story was simpler than any legend. It was just 2 people who had loved each other well and truly, who had built a life of meaning and purpose, who had raised a family grounded in respect for the land and for each other. As they grew older, their pace slowed, but their love never wavered. They still rode out together when weather and health permitted, still sat on their porch watching the sunsets, still reached for each other in the night. The passion of youth had mellowed into something deeper and more enduring, a love that was woven into the very fabric of their beings. Xavier died first, as Meredith had always known he would. He went peacefully in his sleep at 78, with her beside him as she had been for 43 years. Meredith grieved deeply, but without regret. They had lived fully, loved completely, and built something that would endure long after they were both gone. She lived for 5 more years, spending her days with her family, continuing to document the natural world she loved, keeping Xavier's memory alive in stories and laughter. When her own time came, she went without fear, knowing she would see him again, that they would ride together once more through endless golden valleys under starlit skies. The family buried them side by side on a hill overlooking their valley, with a simple marker that read, "Xavier and Meredith Nolan." Together they built a life of love. And that was all that needed to be said, really. Everything else was detail, the specific memories and moments that made up a life. But the essential truth was there in those simple words. They had built a life of love, and in doing so, they had created something that would ripple forward through generations, a legacy of compassion and partnership and genuine devotion. Their great-grandchildren still work the land they claimed, still raise horses with Xavier's patient methods, still document the natural world with Meredith's careful eye. The valley is protected now, designated as a nature preserve, ensuring that the bighorn sheep and golden eagles and all the other creatures Meredith loved will have a home for generations to come. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun is setting and the valley is painted in shades of gold, people say you can almost see them, the cowboy and his lady, riding together through the gathering dusk, their love as enduring as the land itself. Their story a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected moments, and that true love, when tended with care and respect and genuine affection, can create something that transcends time itself.